So this is basically almost a rerun of the session that I gave to the EAUC conference last week, a couple of weeks ago. So if you've seen that, you might recognise some of this, but hopefully it'll be informative to most of you. So let's get going without further ado. If I can, there we go. Sorry, trouble working with my computer. So this basically is just what we're going to try and go through today. Looking at the origins of the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard, which I will abbreviate to SLS because it's a bit of a mouthful if you say it too many times. Why we were doing it and what it is effectively. We'll then go into the structure of the SLS, a bit more detail on the scoring and the mapping and the outputs, and then look at the web portal and how exactly you can use that to work out what your scores are. Excuse me. We'll then go into a couple of case studies and look at some sidelines of scope 3 and what you can do if you want to have a gap analysis or a verification of the scores, and then go into questions at the end, as Fiona mentioned. So just a bit of a background. Some of you may or may not be aware of the Green Scorecard, which was a higher education only tool that we developed a couple of years ago with Ord. It was responded to the sector in that it was deliberately non-competitive, collaborative and communicative. Those things were seen as vital in the era of the Green League from People and Planet, which was causing a sort of a competitiveness within the sector and causing people to not collaborate and share. Had a very, very high take-up. About 100 universities used it within the first 3 months, and that degree of engagement continued when it was updated in 2017. But it was clear that when we did that work, that there was a need for a wider context of sustainability in HE. The Green Scorecard itself covered estates and facilities management, both the indirect issues such as travel and procurement, but also the direct ones like energy and water. But it was clear that aspects such as curriculum and community and leadership and governance, etc., weren't being picked up within that particular tool, which is why when we broadened the tool to expand to FE as well as HE, we picked up these other elements as well. I suppose a quick thought on why do it. The tool has been designed to be a framework for progress so that people can effectively analyse where they are at the moment across against a framework or a set of issues that are deemed pertinent for FE and HE. It's also deliberately aimed at communicating with the senior leadership team. It doesn't happen in every institution, but in some that we've had engagement with, the leadership set the strategy and importance, putting sustainability into very high level documents. But once you've got through directors and management down to practitioners who are actually doing this, the importance and the strategy is diluted somewhat into real on the ground actions. And then conversely as well, when you're looking to put results and feedback and communicate any issues back up to senior leadership, that message can get diluted through the middle management layers. So this is trying to really play to the messages that the leadership want to see, so that the practitioners can have an effective engagement with them. It relates to wider issues across institutions such as reputation, student engagement, etc. Or for the more HE focused, the excellence frameworks or maybe internationalisation as well. Very sorry, my phone has just got off. That's bad form. So the structure of the tool is as follows. There are a number of priority areas and you can see them on the screen in front of you. Within these priority areas, there are a number of framework areas. So some of you may recognise the structure from the LIFE tool. It has been updated with additional things added in. Aspects such as student engagement, health and well-being, risk, and food and drink, etc., have been added. A lot of the topics from estates and operations are both carried over from life and also align quite nicely with the Green Scorecard. So those are the main framework areas which you engage within. It's worth mentioning that these framework areas are all entirely optional. Realise that institutions are very individual. So a land-based college in a rural area might not have the same as a teaching-based or a university, research-based university in a city centre. So you can pick and choose which ones you want to engage with. So you could do a mix of them, such as this. So within each of the framework areas, there are 8 activity areas. And this is really where you start to engage with the tool quite closely. These 8 activity areas are the things that are scored, that you will score yourselves against within each of the framework areas you choose to engage with. So for example, health and well-being here, there are, say these activity areas, they range from policy and strategy through to implementation and performance, with links to the curriculum mentioned in there as well. It's not designed to be a linear process, but there is an order, a sense to the order. Most people start with policies and strategies, then look at, for example, action planning and then measurement, for trying to find out how they're performing and how to implement this. So you score yourselves are 0 to 4 based on descriptions within each of those activity areas. Those descriptions are a similar sort of technique that was used within the ORDSAT tool for those of you higher education focused, and are also quite similar to the aspects within the Green Scorecard. And also very similar to life. So it's a tried and tested way of somebody self-assessing where they are, and you can apply them with as much interpretation as you think you need to make them relevant to your university or college. So a note on scoring, similarly to previous versions of life, for example. There are different rating levels, so they range from bronze at about 40% up to platinum, which you need to score 85% on. It's basically a simple percentage of achieved points. There is no weighting at all to say that climate change adaptation is twice as important as health and well-being, for example, because that won't be this case for every institution. Whilst completion of any framework areas with any priority areas is optional, your scores will be based on all of the answers. So if you haven't filled in a framework, it will be counted as having zeros for your overall score. And you can see the rating between platinum and bronze at a priority area level and also at overall level, but it is only visible to you. Other institutions basically just can engage with your outputs, but they can only see individual scores. So we wanted to, we realised that there's an awful lot of sustainability reporting out there. We wanted to try and map the common tools that other institutions are using to give a recommended score within the SLS, so that you can have a head start basically if you're using any of these particular other benchmark metrics. The Green Scorecard is in there as well. That we will the SLS takes scores directly from the Green Scorecard, so that your level of achievement in the Green Scorecard would carry across to the SLS. But those other 8 or 9 tools, for example, they are external ones. When you say that you are using one of those, then you get recommended scores. For example, if you're doing 50,001, then it's mainly focused on energy, obviously, and they would recommend that you score 3 within policy and strategy, for example. Only recommended scores are very, very changeable, because not everybody applies these external tools and frameworks in the same way. That's another example, is if you were doing 26,000, then you would score within the leadership framework area and also within the risk framework area. As well as mapping the inputs to the tools from other frameworks and metrics, we also wanted to map the outputs. We're mapping them to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the seminal framework at the time. It's also being used with the Global Accord for the higher education sector that the AEC is involved with. Basically, each of the framework areas, such as health and well-being, for example, is aligned with 3 of the goals. There's a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary alignment. You can change these alignments as much as you like. We'll show you how to do that later on the web portal. So if you don't feel that the alignment fits with your institution, then you can change it completely. There are 2 ways of the SDGs are mapped. There's the potential impact, which is the alignment of the issues you've chosen with it's how you align the frameworks with the goals, which gives you your potential impact. And then your actual impact is whether you are scoring highly within the frameworks that you've aligned to a particular SDG. The maths behind it is not massively scientifically generated, but it's a way of giving a semi-quantitative indication of where you are against each of these issues. So we'll now pop onto the website and show how you can access the web portal itself. So as you go into the SLS web portal, you'll be greeted by a welcome page. Within here, you can click on to download the user guide, which will give you much more information than this webinar can on how to use various aspects of it. There's also the ability to use the toggle bar on the top right-hand side of the website to access the Green Scorecard. So even though the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard has been developed, the Green Scorecard, for those of you in higher education, is still there, and you can still use it as much as the same functionality as you always could. So once you click continue, you'll be taken into the main dashboard screen. To start with, you won't see very many scores within that dashboard, so it'll be pretty much blank and empty. Some of you may have a number of scores carried over from the Green Scorecard, but mostly it'll be blank. Again, up there on the top right-hand side, you can see the red box around the toggle switch for you to switch between SLS and the Green Scorecard. Within this dashboard page, there's also options for exporting a PDF, which will show you the look of that later on. You can also share a read-only version of your scores and outputs with other universities or other colleges, so they can see exactly how you're doing without any danger of them changing the scores. And then finally, you can download in a CSV, comma separated values format, all of your scores and narratives so that you can create a bespoke report in your own style or branding, whatever, if that's what you would like to do. On the left-hand side, the menu basically just shows the general process you go through to score and examine your performance. And the main diagram, the main scores is shown in the center there. Each kind of like pie or wedge on the wheel indicates one framework area, and they're split as shown into different priority areas. The coloured filled coloured section shows your current score, and the black line shows your target score, so you can see how you're doing against each one of them. There will also be in this is a previous version that's been updated. I think there's also going to be an indication of your overall rating on the top right hand side as well. So if you want to drill down into the scores within each priority area, you can click on one of the 4 priority areas here. So for example, if you clicked on leadership and governance, you'll see the scores within that priority area. On the right hand side here, you will see the scores and the targets for each of the activity areas within each of the framework areas for this particular priority area. So you will be able to see all of the information that you've put in. It will also indicate what your scoring, what your rating is for this particular priority area. So the dashboard, as mentioned, when you first go in, will be blank because you won't have any scores in there. So probably the first page you want to engage with fully is the other tools sections. This is where you can indicate which tools that you're using elsewhere in your university or college. For each tool, a brief description is included. You can click on the question mark to work out to get a bit more information on what it is. If you highlight one of the tools, such as Responsible Futures, it will show you how you are going to affect your scores and what the recommended scores are within that, by saying that you're using that particular tool or framework. You then simply go through and tick or untick which ones you're using, and then hit save, and then that will basically be taken forwards into your scoring section, so that you can see the recommended scores that are carried across. You then, once you've selected your tools, you can go into the main scoring section of the website. Here it'll reconfirm which tools and schemes have influenced your scores. There will also be traffic light systems so that you can see which of the framework areas are completed and which still need some work to go into them. To get into the main scoring section, you basically click on one of the framework areas. For this example here, we're going to click on health and wellbeing, and that takes you into the main scoring page. And this is where you input most of your information. So as you can see up at the top, you can navigate either going back to the previous screen, or you can navigate through the 8 activity areas within this framework area, and click on next buttons, for example, as well. It will also show you which of the sustainable development goals are mapped to this particular activity framework area. The one on the left being the primary, the secondary in the middle, and then the tertiary mapping on the right hand side. So if you change your mapping, I'll show you later on how to do that, then those icons will change when you go into rescore. On the left-hand side of the page, irrespective of which activity area you're currently putting scores in for, you can see the scores for all of the activity areas. So you can see the context of the score you're making at a particular time within the context of the wider all 8 activity areas within the framework area. So on the right-hand side is where you score yourself, and these are the descriptions that we were saying existed. So you just basically read through those descriptions, find the one that's most closely agrees with what your position within your university or college, and then tick the box on the right-hand side for your current score, and also where you want to target. If the scores are carried over from a previous website, from a previous tool, then those ticks there will be indicated as a light orange colour, I think it is, so that and then show that they're recommended scores only. When you click on them to confirm them, they will turn green. If you don't click on them, then that score will still count, but you can just leave it as a recommended score. There's also the option to put in a score narrative, so that when you come to update your scores in 6 to 12 months' time, you can remind yourself exactly why you thought you were scoring a 3 out of a 4. In this box, there will also be a confirmation of which external tools and schemes are providing you with a recommended score, and it'll also give some sort of a little bit of reasoning as to why a score of 3, for example, is recommended, and it would give any clarity on the assumptions of those schemes. So, for example, with NUS Responsible Futures, it would say that you've assumed that you're doing staff engagement and student engagement, for example. And there's also a box to the right-hand side as well to put a target narrative in, so you can understand where you're going for that. So the next page looks at grouping. So one of the key aspects of the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard is the ability to compare yourself to other institutions. You can basically set up a group of your peers, the people you want to compare yourselves against, by setting up a new group with a name and a description, and then clicking the Add button. That will then appear within this set of user groups. Within that particular group, you can then choose which HE or FE institutions you want to add to that group. So, for example, here you can see that Loughborough, Nottingham, Trent, etc. have already been added to this group. You can then export the PDF for PDF outputs for each of these groups as a single block. I would recommend keeping the number of institutions within each block down to about 15, because the file sizes do get quite large. And on the right hand side there, you've got the preset groups. Again, they're quite large, so I wouldn't recommend downloading those too often, unless you have a particular reason that you want a file that number of universities or colleges. Probably not very important for this year because it's the first year, but you can compare yourself to your last year's performance, and you will also be able to, within that, not only look at the high level dashboard, but also looking at by clicking on the icon, the buttons at the top, you can drill down into particular aspects, particular framework areas. There is also a search by map function. The red icons and markers are the further education colleges, and the blue ones are the higher education universities. And you can see, just by clicking on them, their overall score on the right hand side and their overall performance. And then if you want to focus on a particular framework, a particular priority area, then you can click on these buttons at the top. So once you've inputted all your scores, one of the key things about the tool is the ability to compare yourselves with other institutions and to see where you sit within the broader sector. So this is where you compare yourselves with other institutions. Once you've selected on the left-hand side an activity area, just by clicking on the bar within the chart. So, for example, this person here has clicked on Estates and Operations Action Planning. There is a histogram of the distribution of scores for all those institutions that have completed this particular activity area rating. And the institution that you're looking at is highlighted in green. So in this case, the institution is scoring 4 out of 4, but a lot of other institutions are as well. So it's you can see where you are. If you were scoring 4 out of 4, but most institutions were 0, 1 or 2, then you would know that you were doing something really quite exemplar and best practice. Or vice versa, it could show that there's other things you could learn from other institutions to help you move up the scale if you're at the bottom end of the scoring. If you want to compare yourselves with particular institutions for this framework area, this is where you can do it in this panel here. By default, it shows the top 10 institutions, just because we thought they're going to be the most useful for people to compare themselves against. But you can also click on your pre-existing groupings that you've created on the previous page, so you can show yourselves against the peers that you've set up, the peer group you've set up. You can also, at this point, click on any of the institutions' names here and get taken to a read-only version of their full outputs, where you'll be able to see all of their scores and all of their targets, but not any narratives. And it effectively is a read-only version of the dashboard. That way you can interrogate how other people are doing and find out who you want to collaborate with to move forwards. And then there's also the output mapping of the SDGs. So as I mentioned previously, this on the left-hand side of the page is where you can remap the frameworks with the SDGs. So you can select your primary or secondary or tertiary. You don't have to have a secondary or tertiary if you don't want to. You can just simply have a primary, such as down within the learning, teaching and research. Quality education is indicated as the only map for learning and teaching. But if you are have a particular focus, so if you're a land-based college or a land-based university, you might want to put in life on land, for example, as a secondary SDG, because you have that focus across your entire institution. Yeah, and that's where you can change them. Once you've got you're happy with your selection, you can either press the save button, or you can reset to the default version, the default mapping, in case you've got a bit confused as to which you've changed and which you haven't. So on the right-hand side, it shows you the outputs as to how you're mapping your scores to the SDGs. So here, as I mentioned earlier, we can do potential impact is shown here, as well as the actual impact. So, for example, for zero hunger, the second one down, there's a medium potential impact based on how you've mapped your scores. How you've mapped your frameworks to the SDGs, but the actual impact based on the scores within those frameworks you've mapped is actually limited in this case. And the scoring goes from limited, medium, high and significant impacts. You can also then download all of your scores as well, so you can see how they've been generated, and that comes out in a format-free option in terms of a CSV. So you can format it how you feel the need. And then the last one is just an information page. There's an option for independent gap analysis, which I mentioned in a moment, and this just basically tells you how to go about that and what the process involves. And then finally, on the left-hand side there's another option to download the user guide. So I mentioned previously that you can download the reports. This is the way the reports look. So the one on the right-hand side is the front page, which shows the overall performance of the institution, with some text that basically tries to link the performance of sustainability with the issues facing universities and colleges as a whole, and gives a brief explanation of what the SLS is, so that you can hand that over to senior leadership team, and they would get an example. They would get a good idea once you've explained it a little bit how you're performing against other universities. And then behind that is 4 more detailed pages where each of the priority areas is shown in detail with the frameworks shown and the activity areas for scores and targets within each of those priority areas. Yeah, and as I mentioned, you can also download your exports in raw format. So you can make up any graphs and tool and outputs and reports you want to. So a couple of case studies. Canterbury Christchurch University to start with. A lot of consistency across the priority areas, but a great deal of variability within the frameworks. Some of them are very, very poorly scored at the moment, whereas some of them are very high performing. But you can see there that they've got very, very high aspirations. As an example as well, so you can see the SDG mapping. They're doing everything they reasonably can within reduced inequalities. But for sustainable cities and communities, they have a potential impact which is significant, but they're only actually having a medium at the moment, so they could focus on those mapped frameworks if that's an area of priority for them. And cutting the data the other way, you can see there that they're doing very, very well at policy and strategy. The score is very, very close to their target, but once they get through the process and they're looking at things like implementation and performance, then that's where they need to focus a little bit more attention on. Another case study is Nottingham Trent. I'm sorry these colours haven't come out particularly well because it was from a previous version of the tool. Few areas of weakness in this one because they have been using Life very actively for a number of years, and they're actually exceeding the target in some areas. I'll gloss over this one for time. Here again, you can see that it shows that whilst they are very, very high performing in things like policy and strategy and action planning, etc., if they were going to focus on some aspects, some activities, then measurement, training and support and link to the curriculum would be a way to go about it. And this just goes to show the sort of interrogation you can do with the raw data downloads. And then finally, a case study of Shipley College up near Saltaire in Yorkshire, I think it is. They haven't particularly engaged with Life in the past, but they have been focusing on sustainability to some degree. Staff engagement and aspects of leadership are good, but they do have very, very high aspirations for a number of areas, and this framework can be used to progress this. It's clear that they've chosen not to rate themselves in some areas because potentially they're not relevant for this particular college. And again, from the graph that cuts the data the other way, you can see that they're doing pretty well on training and support, but action planning maybe not so much, and links to the curriculum could really is an area they could focus on. And as I mentioned previously, there is the option to go through a gap analysis or a verification or an auditing of your scores, depending on what terminology you want to use. Purely optional. It's basically the main way to engage with the SLS is through self-assessment. But if you do want to get a review to check that you've assessed yourself accurately, then this will give you a sort of like a galvanizes action and allows you to externally communicate with a bit more effectiveness, a bit more rigor, how you've achieved in which particular area. So the first process is to go through a third-party review where the person doing the gap analysis receives some documents from you and then carries out some interviews with the key people who have been involved with putting together the scores and the position. They will then make some recommendations. This will then be checked for consistency by the EAUC, just to make sure that any number of third-party reviewers are actually giving a similar approach, and then the outcome will then be agreed between the college, the third-party reviewer, and the EAUC, which will then lead to verification that will allow you to externally communicate your score to the wider world. As a bit of an aside, but as part of the commission to generate the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard from the Higher Education Funding Council for England, or HEFCE, they also asked us to create a guidance note on Scope 3 emissions. So that is out there for you to access if you want to. It basically takes you through the calculations that you can do to work out your emissions for travel, procurement, water and waste. And there are various different types of calculation methodology you can use depending on what data you've got available and how accurate you want your answer to be. It can be a bit of a minefield trying to think of Scope 3 emissions, so this hopefully is going to clarify for a lot of people what their options are and help them choose the most appropriate route to getting a number out. So in summary, many of the characteristics of the old Green Scorecard do continue, but they've been merged with the structure and the broader emphasis of the LIFE tool to come up with this very, very broad look at sustainability, but with a very, very accessible web portal. Optional gap analysis should you wish to go for it. Aimed at communicating with wider institution issues and the senior leadership team. Launched, I should say past tense, launched early June, I think it was. And there will be a joint EAUC sector report. Definitely not a league table, but it will show how the sector is performing against various different activities and framework areas, probably annually around the end of the year. Right, so hopefully that is given you a good understanding, a brief run through of what the tool is, what the framework is. And I think now it's over to Fiona to facilitate question time, if there are any questions at all.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. So if anyone does have any questions, if you'd like to unmute yourself, or you can use the chat box. Joe has asked, is there a score narrative history so you can record how scores have changed over time?
You can access the last year's score. If you want to more accurately, more comprehensively track your scores over time, then I'd recommend downloading the data every now and again using the download button, and that way you can just put it into Excel or some other spreadsheet format. That's however you want to manipulate the data.
So the narrative does get overwritten year by year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Kate has asked, is the scorecard available to all higher education and further education? And the answer is yes, it's available to everybody in the UK and Ireland. And it's freely available to everyone.
And there was some interest from overseas users, which should provide some quite interesting context for the UK scores.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So at the EAUC conference, we had great interest from Cape Town and Philippines, and so that's really interesting. Okay, there's another question from Sam. Is it possible to add other tools such as jump into the tool mapping?
Not manually by users, but I suppose if there are any ones that people feel strongly about, then they could tell the EAUC team about it, and it could be incorporated into an update, I suppose.
Absolutely. So if we will sort of be doing a review sort of annually on the scorecard. So if there are any particular feedback that we get from users, then we will put that all together and review that. Obviously, we're trying to keep the tools as relevant to as many users as possible.
think it's worth saying that the mapping of the tools and the tools themselves was based on a really quite a comprehensive piece of research done by the EAUC. So it really was based on a lot of sector engagement. Those tools, we haven't just chosen them at random.
Absolutely, thank you. Is there anywhere to note an institution's contact details so you can call the right person to inquire about their use achievements in SLS?
No, there isn't actually. And I suppose partly because keeping that sort of information up to date for 300 HE and FE colleges and institutions would be a job in itself. So I would just recommend getting on Google. Other search engines are available. If you need to get in touch with someone from that, that's probably the most effective way.
Absolutely. So the institution has a institution-wide login, and it's for the institution to manage that of who has gone the details. So so we're leaving it for the institution themselves to manage that.
Yeah.
But you can contact us if you do wish to know who has received the login details.
Okay.
Mark is asking, is there an easy way to download the questions to disseminate separately from the tool and issue to relevant individuals within the university to complete?
The short answer is I can't remember whether they are included within the data download. From memory, I don't think they are actually. So at the moment, potentially...
Well, each of the activity areas would be, but just not the particular description of the scoring.
That's right, yes. Although if people do think that that's something they would feel need for, then during the development of the SLS tool, we would have had those descriptions in some sort of Microsoft Word or Excel format. So if there is a need, then the EAUC can facilitate us generating a standard set of complete responses so that people can disseminate them.
Probably I'd say the easiest way to do that, Andy, would be using the share function.
Yep, yeah, that would also work as well.
So that gives a view-only, read-only view of the questions, which then you can disseminate to the relevant individuals within the university.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, next question is, what format will the annual report take? The honest answer is I'm not quite sure. It will be a PDF that will be shared widely with the sector. It will have a summary of the usage of the SLS from the users. It will not name any particular institutions. We may have case studies, but we would, of course, always ask for permission from the institution to use such case studies. But it will be as the sector as a whole for the data. Okay. Any further questions? Let's see if there's any more coming in. Okay, we haven't got any further questions, so I suggest we will end this webinar now. Obviously, if anyone does have any questions, then please do just contact us afterwards. If you want to have a login details, please just email the info@sustainabilityleadershipscorecard.org.uk. And I'll take the opportunity to thank Andy very much for your time, and thank you for everyone who has joined us on this webinar.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.